The ferry to Alcatraz Island cut through the choppy waters of San Francisco Bay on a foggy October afternoon in 2008. 5 college friends from UC Berkeley huddled together on the upper deck. Their excitement barely contained despite the gray weather threatening to turn their senior year adventure into a wash. "I can't believe we're finally doing this," said Rachel Martinez, adjusting her digital camera strap. The psychology major had been planning this trip for months, fascinated by the prison's notorious history of escape attempts and psychological isolation. "Just promise me we won't get separated," joked Kevin Park, though there was genuine nervousness in his voice. The computer science student had always been claustrophobic, and the idea of touring the cramped prison cells made him uneasy. Sarah Williams, their unofficial group leader, checked her watch. "The audio tour is supposed to last about 45 minutes. We'll stick together, see everything, and catch the 4:30 ferry back." She was a practical one, already accepted to law school and determined to keep everyone on schedule. Mark Chun and David Thompson, roommates since freshman year, were more interested in the technical aspects of the famous 1962 escape. "I still think they made it," Mark argued, pointing toward the distant shore. "The currents, the timing, it was possible if they planned it right. Or they drowned within an hour," David countered. "The water temperature alone would have killed them." As the ferry docked at Alcatraz, none of them noticed a maintenance worker watching from a restricted area of the island, a man who had been waiting for the right group of visitors for a very long time. The 5 friends joined a standard audio tour with about 30 other tourists, their voices echoing to the empty cell blocks as they learned about infamous inmates like Al Capone and the Birdman of Alcatraz. But at 3:47 p.m., according to Park Service records, something went wrong. Other tourists later reported that the group of 5 had been at the back of the tour group. When they reached cell block D, the next time anyone looked, they were gone. If real-life mysteries like this keep you up at night, help us keep them in the public eye. Hit the like button and subscribe to Gone Cold. Every week, we bring you stories of disappearances and cold cases that still need answers. Ranger Patricia Coleman had worked at Alcatraz for 8 years, and she'd never experienced anything like the disappearance of the 5 UC Berkeley students. The island was only 22 acres, surrounded by frigid water, with limited places to hide. Yet somehow, 5 people had vanished without a trace. "We've searched every accessible area twice," Coleman reported to FBI agent Michael Torres the following morning. "Every cell, every corridor, the recreation yard, the dining hall, nothing. It's like they just evaporated." The Coast Guard had been searching the bay since the previous evening, working on the assumption that the students had somehow fallen or jumped into the water. But the fog had been thick, visibility was poor, and the current around Alcatraz were notoriously treacherous. Agent Torres studied the visitor logs and security footage. The last confirmed sighting was at 3:45 p.m. in cell block D. The tour guide, Jennifer Walsh, says she did a head count at the end of the recreation yard portion, and everyone was accounted for. Then what happened in those 12 minutes? Coleman asked. The investigation consumed weeks. The FBI interviewed every tourist who had been on the island that day, every Park Service employee, every maintenance worker. The students' families hired private investigators. Their cell phones had all gone dead simultaneously at 3:47 p.m., which experts said was virtually impossible unless they had been deliberately disabled. Rachel's camera was eventually found in San Francisco Bay by a fishing boat, but the memory card had been removed and the camera showed signs of deliberate damage. Kevin's backpack washed up on Angel Island 3 days later, empty except for his UC Berkeley student ID. The most disturbing clue came from the Park Service's own security system. Video footage from the cell blocks showed the 5 students entering cell block D at 3:44 p.m., but on the footage showing their planned exit route, they never appeared. It was as if they had simply stepped out of reality. After 6 months of investigation, the case was classified as a missing persons incident with suspected drowning. The families held memorial services. The students were declared legally dead after 7 years. But Alcatraz Island kept it secret. Chapter 3. 15 years later, Tommy Reeves had been working maintenance at Alcatraz for 3 years, and he thought he knew every inch of the notorious prison. The island's infrastructure was aging, requiring constant repairs to keep the tourist attraction operational. On a routine inspection in November 2023, Tommy was checking for water damage in the lower level of cell block D when he noticed something that made him stop cold. Etched into the concrete wall of cell 142, barely visible unless you knew exactly where to look, were 5 names: Rachel Martinez, Kevin Park, Sarah Williams, Mark Chin, David Thompson. Below the names was a date, October 15, 2008, the day the UC Berkeley students had vanished. Tommy's hands shook as he traced the crude letters with his flashlight. The etching was deep, carved with something sharp, and showed signs of age consistent with being there for years. But cell 142 wasn't on any tour route. It was in a restricted maintenance area that tourists never accessed. What the hell? Tommy muttered, pulling out his phone to take pictures. As he adjusted the angle of his flashlight, he noticed something else that made his blood run cold. Below the names and date was a message, scratched in smaller letters. We're still here. Level B3. Help U.S. Level B3 didn't exist on any current blueprints of Alcatraz. The prison had been built on bedrock, with only minimal basement levels for utilities. But Tommy had worked enough old buildings to know that official blueprints didn't always tell the whole story. He immediately called his supervisor, then the Park Service director, then the FBI. Within hours, Agent Elena Rodriguez, who had taken over cold cases from the retired Michael Torres, was standing in cell 142, staring at the impossible message. How long has this area been restricted? Rodriguez asked. Since the prison closed in 1963, Tommy replied. Only maintenance staff come down here, and that's maybe once or twice a year. I would have noticed this before. Rodriguez studied the etching with a magnifying glass. The tool marks are consistent with something like a nail or a small piece of metal. The depth suggests it was carved over time, not all at once. She paused. If this is genuine, it means those students didn't drown. They were somewhere on this island, alive, at least long enough to carve this message. But where? Tommy asked. We know every tunnel, every room, every storage area. Rodriguez looked around the cramped maintenance area with new eyes. Maybe we don't. Maybe they're a part of Alcatraz that have been hidden for 60 years. What neither of them realized was that beneath their feet, 3 levels down in a forgotten section of the island's original construction, the truth about the missing students was waiting to be discovered, along with secrets that would explain why Alcatraz had really been closed and why some prisoners had never been transferred when the facility was shut down. The Alcatraz Disappearance, Part 2, Chapter 4. The Hidden Blueprints. Agent Rodriguez spent the next 3 days in the National Archives in San Francisco, digging through decades of classified documents related to Alcatraz's closure. What she found in a misfiled box from 1963 changed everything she thought she knew about the infamous prison. The original construction blueprints from 1934 showed something that had been systematically removed from all subsequent documents: a 3-level underground facility designated as Special Housing Unit, Classification Level 5. The plans indicated cells, corridors, and what appeared to be medical facilities built directly into the bedrock beneath the main prison. Why would they build underground cells? Rodriguez asked Dr. James Harrison, a historian specializing in federal prison systems. Dr. Harrison studied the blueprints with growing unease. In 1934, the federal government was dealing with organized crime figures like Al Capone, but also political prisoners, suspected foreign agents. If they needed to house someone completely off the books. Rodriguez found her answer in a declassified memo dated December 3, 1963. Operation Blackout. All prisoners designated Classification Level 5 to be transferred to undisclosed location, underground facility to be sealed and removed from official records. National Security Classification, Top Secret. But a handwritten note in the margin, signed by Warden Olin G. Blackwell, told a different story. Transfer impossible. Subjects too dangerous for transport. Facility sealed with occupants inside. God help us all. Tommy Reeves was waiting for Rodriguez when she returned to Alcatraz, his face pale with excitement and fear. I found it, he said, simply. The entrance to Level B3. He led her to a utility room in the basement of cell block D, where a seemingly solid wall showed hairline cracks that formed the outline of a door. I was checking for the source of a water leak when I noticed the temperature difference. This wall is about 10 degrees colder than the others. Using ground-penetrating radar, they confirmed that there was indeed open space behind the wall. But when Rodriguez applied for a warrant to break through, she was told the request had been classified and referred to the Department of Homeland Security. That's when I knew we were onto something big, Rodriguez later wrote in her case notes. Chapter 5. The descent took Rodriguez 3 weeks to get authorization to breach the wall, and even then, she was required to bring along Dr. Sarah Chun, a specialist in hazardous materials, and Lieutenant Commander Rick Santos from the Navy's Nuclear Emergency Support Team. The level of federal oversight suggested that whatever was behind that wall was far more serious than missing college students. The wall was 3 feet thick, reinforced concrete that had clearly been poured hastily. When they finally broke through, the smell that emerged made everyone step back. Not the odor decay, but something chemical and artificial, like preserved specimens in a laboratory. Their flashlights revealed a staircase descending into darkness. The walls were lined with the same rough concrete as the main prison, but the air had a quality that suggested the space had been sealed for decades. Temperature is holding steady at 58 degrees, Dr. Chen reported as they descended. No immediate chemical hazard detected, but I'm picking up elevated levels of formaldehyde. Level B1 contained what appeared to be administrative offices, long abandoned but with files still scattered on desks as if the occupants had left in a hurry. Rodriguez photographed everything, including a duty roster dated December 1963 that listed guards for Special Housing Unit, deep level. Level B2 was worse. It contained what could only be described as medical examination rooms, complete with restraint tables and equipment that looked more suited to experimentation than treatment. In one room, they found jars of preserved tissue samples, each labeled with a number rather than a name. What the hell were they doing down here? Tommy whispered, his voice echoing in the sterile corridors. Level B3 was where they found the truth. The corridor opened into a series of cells unlike anything in the main prison above. These weren't designed for temporary incarceration. They were built for permanent isolation. Each cell was sealed with steel doors that could only be opened from the outside, with small slots for food delivery and nothing else. And in cell B3-7, they found evidence that someone had been there recently. Chapter 6. The survivors' of the cell contained makeshift bedding, empty water bottles with dates from 2008, and scratch marks on the walls that formed a crude calendar. But most shocking of all, carved into metal doorframe, with the initials RM, KP, MC, and DT, the missing UC Berkeley students. They were kept here, Rodriguez said, her voice barely a whisper. For how long? Tommy was examining the calendar scratches. Based on these marks, looks like at least 3 years. Maybe more. But the cells were empty now. In the final cell, B3-12, they found a note written on a torn piece of cloth. Moved us deeper. Level B4. The others are still here. Don't let them take anyone else. SW 2011-inch Dr. Chen's instruments suddenly began beeping rapidly. I'm detecting massive electromagnetic interference from below us. Whatever's down there is still active. They found the entrance to Level B4 behind what appeared to be a solid wall of rock. But unlike the entrance to B3, this one showed signs of recent use. The hidden mechanism was well maintained, and the air that emerged when they opened was warm and humid. This is where the trail ends for us, Lieutenant Commander Santos announced, studying readings from equipment Rodriguez didn't recognize. I'm detecting radiation signatures consistent with experimental technology from the 1960s. We need a full hazmat team. But Rodriguez had come too far to stop now. Against direct orders, she entered Level B4 alone, following a corridor that seemed to stretch impossibly far into the bedrock of Alcatraz Island. What she found in the depths challenged everything she thought she knew about reality. Level B4 wasn't just a prison. It was a laboratory, and the experiments that had been conducted there in the 1960s had created something that had been feeding on visitors to Alcatraz for decades. The 5 college students have been the latest in a long line of people who have been taken not by accident, but by design. And somewhere in the deepest levels of the island, they were still alive, changed but alive. Rodriguez's final radio transmission before her own disappearance was a single word: run. The entrance to Level B4 was sealed with concrete the next day, and Agent Elena Rodriguez was officially reported as having suffered a fatal accident during the investigation. But Tommy Reeves knew the truth, and sometimes late at night, he could hear voices echoing up from the depths of Alcatraz, voices calling for help that would never come. The Alcatraz Disappearance, Finale Chapter 7. The experiment 3 days after Agent Rodriguez's disappearance, Tommy Reeves received an encrypted email that changed everything. The sender was listed as S. Williams 2023 and contained a single line: Maintenance Shaft C 7. Come alone. We're running out of time. Despite every instinct telling him to contact the authorities, Tommy found himself in the restricted maintenance area of Alcatraz at 3 a.m., following directions that led him to a ventilation shaft he'd somehow never noticed before. The shaft was wide enough for a person to crawl through, and warm air flowed from its depths. 20 feet down, the shaft opened into a corridor that didn't appear on any blueprint Tommy had ever seen. The walls were lined with thick cables and pipes that hummed with electrical current, suggesting that whatever lay below was very much alive and operational. He found Sarah Williams in what appeared to be a makeshift laboratory, but she was no longer the college student who had vanished 15 years ago. Her hair was completely white, her skin had an unnatural pallor, and her eyes reflected light like an animal's. But her voice was still recognizably human. "You came," she said, her relief evident despite her transformed appearance. "I wasn't sure the email would work. The electromagnetic interference makes it difficult to communicate with the surface. Sarah, what happened to you? Where are the others?" Sarah's expression darkened. The Alcatraz Psychiatric Research Project. It started in 1959, officially to study the effects of isolation on criminal behavior. Unofficially, she gestured to equipment that looked decades ahead of anything Tommy had ever seen. They were trying to create the perfect prisoner. Someone who couldn't escape, couldn't resist, couldn't even think of freedom. She led him deeper into the facility, past rooms filled with monitoring equipment, and holding cells that made the original prison look humane. They used a combination of psychological conditioning, experimental drugs, and something else, electromagnetic manipulation of neural pathways. The goal was to create prisoners who were physically and mentally incapable of escape or violence. But the project was shut down in 1963. Tommy said the official project was, but by then they had created something unexpected. The process didn't just make people docile, it made them dependent on the electromagnetic field generated by the equipment. Take us away from this place for more than a few hours and we die. Chapter 8. The truth revealed Sarah led Tommy to an observation deck overlooking a vast underground chamber that extended far beneath San Francisco Bay. The space was filled with sophisticated equipment that hummed and pulsed with energy, creating the electromagnetic field that kept the facility's residents alive. "There are 43 of us now," Sarah explained. "The original test subjects from the 1960s. People were taken over the years to replace those who died. And..." She paused. "The 5 of us from 2008. Tommy could see figures moving in the chamber below. People who had been reported as missing, dead, or escaped from Alcatraz over the decades. All of them bore the same pale complexion and reflective eyes as Sarah. Agent Rodriguez." Tommy asked. "She's adapting. The process takes about 6 months for full integration. After that, you can't survive in the outside world anymore." The horrifying scope of the operation became clear as Sarah explained. Every few years, when one of the original subjects died, the facility's automated systems would begin hunting for replacements. The maintenance worker who had lured the UC Berkeley students into the tunnels in 2008 had been acting under the influence of the facility's psychological conditioning system. "It doesn't want to hurt people," Sarah said. "It just wants to survive. And it needs us to survive." Tommy stared at the chamber in horror. How many people know about this? A handful of government officials who inherited the project from their predecessors. They can't shut it down because we'd all die, and they can't move us because we're bound to the specific electromagnetic signature. So they maintain the cover-up and occasionally provide new subjects when needed. That's why they sealed off the investigation, Tommy realized. They were protecting the secret, not solving the case. Sarah nodded grimly. And now you know, which means you have a choice to make. Chapter 9. The Escape, There's a Way Out, Sarah said urgently. I've been working on it for 15 years. The electromagnetic field can be disrupted, but only from inside, and only by someone who's been fully integrated into the system. She led Tommy to a control room where Kevin Park sat surrounded by computer equipment that looked both ancient and futuristic. His transformation was even more dramatic than Sarah's. His fingers had elongated and seemed to interface directly with the machinery. I've been mapping the facility's neural network, Kevin explained, his voice echoing strangely. The conditioning system, the electromagnetic field, the automated hunting protocols. It's all connected. If we can create a cascade failure in the main power core, the field will collapse gradually enough that those of us who have been here longest might survive the transition. Might? Tommy asked. The others, Rachel, Mark, David, they've been integrated too long. The process has changed their cellular structure. But Sarah, and I still have enough human DNA that we could potentially survive if we get medical treatment immediately. Sarah pulled out a device that looked like a modified radio. This will send a signal to override the facility security systems and shut down the electromagnetic field. But once I activate it, we'll have maybe 30 minutes before the place starts collapsing, and the signal will alert every government agency monitoring this place. Tommy realized what she was asking. You need me to get you to the surface. We need you to call the media, Kevin corrected. This has to be exposed. If the government just covers it up again, they'll rebuild somewhere else, and more people will disappear. The plan was desperate and dangerous. Sarah activated the override device, sending alarms screaming throughout the facility. As they raced through corridors filled with decades of trapped people struggling to escape, Tommy uses maintenance access to reach the surface with Sarah and Kevin. The electromagnetic field collapse triggered a series of explosions that shook Alcatraz Island and could be felt in San Francisco. The official story was that aging electrical systems had caused a catastrophic failure in the tourist facilities. But Tommy had already contacted every major news outlet in California, and Sarah Williams' story, supported by DNA evidence and medical documentation of her impossible physiological changes, broke the cover-up wide open. Epilogue, the Alcatraz Psychiatric Research Project, was officially acknowledged by the Department of Defense 6 months after the facility's destruction. 17 people were confirmed to have survived the electromagnetic field collapse, though most required extensive medical treatment for conditions that science was still struggling to understand. Sarah Williams and Kevin Park became advocates for government transparency and victims' rights, though their transformed physiology meant they could never fully return to normal life. The other 3 members of their group, Rachel, Mark, and David, had been too deeply integrated into the facility's systems to survive its destruction. Tommy Reeves left his job at the National Park Service and became a whistleblower advocate, helping other government employees expose dangerous secret projects. He never returned to Alcatraz Island, which was permanently closed to public tours. But sometimes late at night, when the fog rolled in from San Francisco Bay, people reported seeing lights in the ruins of the prison. And occasionally, messages would appear on social media from accounts belonging to people who had been reported dead for decades. Brief posts saying only "still here," "still watching," "never forget." The official investigation concluded that the Alcatraz Psychiatric Research Project had ended with the facility's destruction. But Tommy knew better. In a government that could keep such a project secret for 60 years, he understood that some secrets never truly die. They just find new places to hide. The case was closed, but the Watchers remained, ensuring that the truth about Alcatraz would never be forgotten, and that no one would ever again disappear into the dark places beneath America's most infamous prison. 5 friends vanished inside one of the most monitored tourist sites in America, Alcatraz Island. No alarms, no witnesses, and no trace. If this story left you questioning everything, click like. It helps these stories reach more people and keeps the search for answers alive. And tell us in the comments, what do you think happened to them? Was it an accident, something planned, or did they discover something no one was meant to find? We read every comment. Your theories keep these cases alive and the conversation going. At Gone Cold, we share new real-life mysteries every week. We'll see you in the next video.